It looks like I've got my signal. Okay. I'm gonna do a mix of a little bit of talking and a little bit of reading, so bear with me. Because as I was doing the research for this, I found some interest. I found some, okay. I found some incredibly interesting tidbits that I was learning about my subject tonight, and I just want to share them because they're so interesting. Have any of you not ever heard of the Algonquin Hotel and the Round Table? Because anyone who's an ex-New Yorker, it's like, you know it. Okay. So I'll give you a little background on it. On 44th Street in Manhattan, between 5th and 6th Avenues, which means you're walking west and you're going toward Broadway, is a very, very famous old hotel called the Algonquin Hotel. And Algonquin is one of the Indian tribes that settled, that was in New York before anyone else came. So very and the Algonquin was very, very, very elegant in its day. And a lot of people who were associated with Broadway and the literary world, specifically of that city, hung out there. It was also a pretty expensive, nice hotel to stay in. And to this day, it is there. They have taken the round table and restored it or bought a new one, and it's out there for tourists. It's now someplace you might go into for pre-theater dinner if you were going to a show. But in its heyday, it was really, one of the in places to be. And as someone like me who grew up, I call myself a New Yorker. I grew up on Long Island. So for people who grew up in New York, I'm not, but we had a train that went, you got on the train in Long Beach and in 55 minutes you were in Penn Station. And once I was old enough to do that, either on my own with this person when we were dating or with my best friend from high school or cut school, to go into the city for a day. We were just used to thinking of ourselves as New Yorkers. And if you were a New Yorker, you knew the story of this place. In addition, in my personal case, I was an English major in college. So the writers who hung out at the Algonquin were very, very, very well known in their time. Most of them wrote short stories, often for the magazines, Vanity Fair and some of the others that were popular in their time. But people, Edna Ferber and other famous writers of the era hung out there. The era when the Algonquin was at its highest parallels the Jazz Age. So we're talking about post-World War One, pre-World War, not only pre-World War II, but pre-Depression. The heyday of the place is really the Roaring Twenties. And if you take your mind back to the Roaring Twenties, particularly those in the audience who were women, this was a time when women really came out of the box they had been put in the Victorian era. They were there drinking. They were there smoking. Picture, God, here I am blocking on the name of the person I'm reading, Dorothy Parker. You would see her with the long cigarette holder in the, kind of thing. They wore very much more not the kind of revealing clothing you see at the Super Bowl now, but what was in its day revealing clothing, the flapper dresses. And they had a spirit of adventure and liberation that sadly was knocked off with the Depression and World War II. It took a lot of years for that to come back. So these tidbits I'm going to be reading, at least from her, really reflect that era. And I'm trying to think if there's anything really, oh, the other thing that I found, two things I found fascinating. I have to share these because they're incredible. We grew up in a time where jokes were told about different people and ethnic groups, and nobody was afraid of them. They're utterly non-PC, okay? But nobody said PC in those days. I grew up in a Jewish home, and Jewish comedians told Jewish jokes, but other comedians told Black jokes and Polish jokes and these kind of jokes and those kind of jokes. in addition to those being very, very common on TV and literature, and if you were going to what would I call it, a nightclub and hearing a comedian. The other part of it was there were also an enormous number of comedians who told jokes denigrating other people in their family. Very typical, the wife. Think Henny Youngman, the name click with anybody? And we laughed at those things. We laughed at them not because we were mean spirited, but because we were used to this being the butt of humor. Well, it turns out that some of the people at the round table, including James Thurber, who did not sit at the round table, he didn't like it. He stayed in the rooms in the hotel, but these people were his friends. He told those kind of jokes and wrote those kinds of stories, and they were published largely in the New Yorker, and they were fine in their time. So it was interesting to me to reread now with PC, absolutely in my brain. And I can't imagine that some of the things I read in high school and college, some of the things I might have written a book report on, and some of the things that were common in our literary world would be as well taken now. But these writers and comedians, these writers sort of opened the door for that comedy, which went on way beyond their era. Because the comedians I'm talking about were on stage in the 40s and 50s when we had TV. So it just opened this route towards something. The other thing I found absolutely fascinating, this is my book. It's called The Portable Dorothy Parker. I did not buy it in college. It's a second edition, but I certainly have had it for 30 or 40 years. This was published in 1944, and it was continued to be published until 1976 or 8. I could look at my notes, but take my word for it then. There were only 3 books that lasted that long that were published for the same purpose in 1944. One was Shakespeare, one was the Bible, and one was Dorothy Parker. What happened in 1944? These books were published to be sent over to the soldiers in the war. The portable, there was a whole world of the portable this, the portable that. But the 3 that were still published way into the 70s, one of them was hers. I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. So I wanted to share that with you. And on my table, I have some precious things of my own. I know, unicorns. And one of my very favorite things, this holds matchbooks, which of course we don't use anymore unless it be a candle leaf, right? Unicorn. Steve and I spent a year in England with very, very young children. And if any of you either have English backgrounds or have traveled there or have anything in your world that resonates with that, you know that the English crown, flag, and all of their regalia are the lion and the unicorn. And having very young kids in England at that time, this was 1976 to 77, I just flipped over unicorns. I had little kids. We had unicorn coloring books. There was a unicorn Lego set because Legos were just being introduced there. So I bought these guys in a ceramic shop in Liverpool. I think I had this at a different time. And I'm bringing it out because it is a great way for me to get into my first reading. James Thurber was an incredibly gifted writer, incredibly gifted brain. He was blind in one eye because at the age of 7, he's the middle of 3 boys. They were playing with bows and arrows, and James became a little impatient and moved too fast, and his brother shot an arrow right into his left eye, and he was blind for the rest of his life. None of that stopped him from being one of the most prolific writers of his era. His short stories are legend. He wrote plays, he wrote articles, he did newspaper reporting, and he absolutely never gave up It was incredible. They said to the end of his life, he dictated his stories and he could keep 2,000 words in his head without having to have anyone refresh it as he did dictation. Um, his writing is not in the early part of the 20s. It comes a little bit later. And he was very friendly, particularly with Dorothy Parker, Lillian Hellman, and a few of the other people at the round table. But he actually didn't like hanging out with them. He didn't need that pat on the back that so appealed to all of them, like, oh, you're cool and you're smart and you're witty. He just wrote and drew and he was witty, but he was involved with the New Yorker magazine from the get-go. The New Yorker editor literally interviewed him, hired him immediately, and he wrote for the New Yorker for the rest of his life. It is ironic that this is the 100th anniversary of the New Yorker. It was first published in 1925. It's been around a long time, and if you are from New York, you love the New Yorker magazine. And the great thing about Thurber was he illustrated all of his stories, which is kind of interesting when you think that he's completely blind in one eye. And my personal favorite story, and when I read it to you, you'll see there was a reason for my long preface, is called The Unicorn in the Garden. And I am going to tell you one more thing before I get to the story. I thought, like most New Yorkers, that Thurber, because he wrote for the New Yorker and was at the Algonquin, must have come from New York. I mean, how could you be that witty and that whatever? And, I'm a New Yorker. I'm blind to anything on the other side of the George Washington Bridge. So in 1982, Steve and I and our three children moved to Columbus, Ohio, where Steve took up practice. And I'm in Columbus and I'm living in suburbia and I'm involved with the museum. And I start to take a walk one day to the east side of Columbus. Everything in my world was the other way, west and north. Walking to the east side, because somebody told me there's some wonderful old Victorian houses there. And I walk over and I see this area with 4 or 5 houses around a central ground, screens, all beautiful Victorian houses. And right in the middle of the greens is a sculpture of a unicorn. What is that doing in the middle of Columbus, Ohio? Walk closer. And there's a little sign in front of the house with the unicorn, and it's called Thurber House. James Thurber was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. Thurber House is a museum that honors him. I have included it in some of my paintings. So my whole fondness for Thurber just did nothing but grow because now I found out he was a hometown boy, knew the schools he went to, etc. Okay, the unicorn in the garden. Once upon a sunny morning, a man who sat down in a breakfast nook looked up from his scrambled eggs to see a white unicorn with a golden horn quietly cropping the roses in the garden. The man went up to the bedroom where his wife was still asleep and woke her. There's a unicorn in the garden, he said, eating roses. She opened one unfriendly eye and looked at him. The unicorn is a mythical beast, she said, and turned her back on him. The man walked slowly downstairs and out into the garden. The unicorn was still there, and he was now browsing among the tulips. The unicorn, said the man, and he pulled up a lily and he gave it to him. The unicorn ate it gravely. With a high heart, because there was a unicorn in his garden, the man went upstairs and roused his wife again. The unicorn, he said, ate a lily. His wife sat up in bed and looked at him coldly. You're a booby, she said, and I'm going to have to put you in the booby hatch. The man, who had never liked the words booby and booby hatch, and who liked them even less on a shiny morning when there was a unicorn in the garden, thought for a moment. We'll see about that, he said. He walked over to the door. There's a golden horn in the middle of his forehead, he told her. And then he went back to the garden to watch the unicorn. But the unicorn had gone away. The man sat down among the roses and went to sleep. As soon as the husband was gone out of the house, the wife got up and dressed as fast as she could. She was very excited and there was a gloat in her eye. She telephoned the police and telephoned a psychiatrist. She told them to hurry to her house and bring a straitjacket. When the police and the psychiatrist arrived, they sat down in chairs and looked at her with great interest. My husband, she said, saw a unicorn this morning. The police looked at the psychiatrist and the psychiatrist looked at the police. He told me it ate a lily, she said. The psychiatrist looked at the police and the police looked at the psychiatrist. He told me it had a golden horn in the middle of its forehead, she said. At a solemn signal from the psychiatrist, the police leaped from their chairs and seized the wife. They had a hard time subduing her, but she put up a terrific struggle, but they finally subdued her. Just as they got her into a straitjacket, the husband came back into the house. Did you tell your wife you saw a unicorn? Asked the police. Of course not, the husband said. The unicorn is a mythical beast. That's all I wanted to know, said the psychiatrist. Take her away. I'm sorry, sir, but your wife is as crazy as a jaybird. So they took her away, cursing and screaming, and shut her up in an institution. The husband lived happily ever after. He writes these stories like Aesop. Moral, don't count your boobies until they are hatched. I know it's very un-PC, but I love that story. Now, Dorothy Parker is a totally different story, and she wrote heavily for the New Yorker. In fact, she was at its origin. He came to it like coming into New York, and somebody introduced him to the editor, and lo and behold, he's writing for it. But she was at the table when the New Yorker was beginning to come into being. Um, she had a natural wit that was devastating and blood curdling, but it came to her like that. You know, you're sometimes around people who are like that. We have one in our family, so I know it. Somebody said to her when the New Yorker started, because she had started with Vanity Fair, and they said, "Why aren't you at work today?" And she said, "I'm waiting for the pencil." The New Yorker was so poor, it had no money, had no office, it was just getting off the ground. And, you know, instead of saying, "Oh, you know, there's no work for me to do today," she just says, "I'm waiting for the pencil." I found that rather hilarious. Dorothy Parker wrote a lot of poetry. I would say you could go through, and that's what I'm choosing to read. You could go through her poetry and you'll find two themes overarching all else. One is love and loss, and the other is suicide. I did not know that she had attempted suicide once. Once after an abortion because she got pregnant by someone who was married to someone else and she was in between marriages. And another a little bit later. And she ended up toward the end of her life, heavy drinker. So it's not one of those happy stories. But as a young woman, she was born in New Jersey, but her mother wanted her to so completely be a real New Yorker that they left the beach, New Jersey beach resort early and drove to Manhattan so she could be born in Manhattan, because you're not a New Yorker unless you're from Manhattan. Okay, it is called the city. It is not, sorry about Queens, but you know the deal. I lived in Queens, so we can relate. In any event, so some of her poetry is very funny, but there's an edge to it. By the time you swear you're his, shivering and sighing, and he swears his passion is infinite, undying, lady, make a note of this. One of you is lying. And these two just fit the theme. Razors pain you, rivers are damp, acid stain you, and drugs cause cramp. Guns aren't lawful, nooses give, gas smells awful. You might as well live. Clearly, dog eared a lot, and we'll see how much of it I get to, but you're okay. This one's an interesting. It's called a threnody. I had not known what a threnody was, but it's a song of lamentation. It's a particular type of poem. Lilacs blossom just as sweet, now my heart is shattered. If I bowled it down the street, who's to say it mattered? If there's one that rode away, what would I be missing? Lips that taste of tears, they say, are the best for kissing. Eyes that watch the morning stars seem a little brighter. Arms held out to darkness are usually whiter. Shall I bar the strolling guest, bind my brow with willow, when they say the empty breast is the softer pillow? That a heart falls tinkling down, never think it ceases. Every likely lad in town gathers up the pieces. If there's one gone whistling by, would I let it grieve me? Let him wonder if I lie. Let him half believe me. You gave me these wonderful things, but now I don't know. A very short song. Once when I was young and true, someone left me sad, broke my brittle heart in two, and that is very bad. Love is for unlucky folk. Love is but a curse. Once there was a heart I broke, and that I think is worse. Is actually, she was always caricatured as a character. She's actually a really talented, gifted poet. They liken her in her early years to Edna St. Vincent Millay, and there's a lilt to the poems that kind of clicks. Wail. Love has gone a rocketing. That is not the worst. I could do without the thing and not be the first. Joy has gone the way it came. That is nothing new. I could get along the same. Many people do. Dig for me the narrow bed now that I am bereft. All my petty hates are dead. And what have I left? And this one's my all-time favorite. It's called The Satin Dress. Needle, needle, dip and dart, thrusting up and down. Where's the man could ease a heart like a satin gown? See the stitches curve and crawl round the cunning seams, patterns thin and sweet and small as a lady's dreams. Wantons go in bright brocade, brides in organdie, ginghams for the plighted maid, satins for the free, wools to line a miser's chest, crapes to calm the old, velvet hides an empty breast, satins for the bold. Lawn is for a bishop's yoke, linens for a nun, satin is for wiser folk. Would the dress were done. Satin glows in candlelight, satins for the proud. They will say who watch at night, what a fine shroud. Threw that in at the end, and I was very much caught off guard. Ah, this one you'll love. Okay. Chant for dark hours. Some men cannot pass a bookshop, in quotes. Lady, make your mind up and wait your life away. Some men cannot pass a crack game. He said he'd come at moonrise, and here's another day. Some men cannot pass a bar room. Wait about and hang about, and that's the way it goes. Some men cannot pass a woman. Heaven never send me another one of those. Some men cannot pass a golf course. Read a book, sew a seam, and slumber if you can. Some men cannot pass a haberdasher's. All your life you wait around for some damn man. Obviously, very much a poem of its time. I don't think we have to worry about the haberdasher anymore, but the golf course and some of the other stuff, maybe. Um, I have time for one more. New love, where are you to lead me? Along a narrow way that marks a crooked line. How are you to slake me, and how are you to feed me? With bitter yellow berries and a sharp new wine. New love, shall I be forsaken? One shall go wandering, and one of us must sigh. Sweet it is to slumber, but how shall we awaken? Whose will be the The broken heart when dawn comes by. I have something else here and it's not clicking with me now. I'd love to read you, if I have the time, one more short story from, because I was reading it this morning and it hadn't been on my list. And I just was having the best time with it. And I'm sorry this isn't in a book. I had to get these. If you're curious and you want to look at this when we're done, you'll see all of his sketches with every short story. And if I were organized, I would have put it on. Longer. The father and his daughter. I hadn't prepared this one before, but I read it and I couldn't resist. A little girl was given so many picture books on her 7th birthday that her father should have run his office and let her mother run the home. Thought his daughter should give one or two of her new books to a little neighbor boy named Robert, who had dropped in, more by design than by chance. Now, taking books or anything else from a little girl is like taking arms from an Arab, a candy from a baby. But the father of the little girl had his way, and Robert got 2 of her books. After all, that leaves you with 9, said the father, who thought he was a philosopher and a child psychologist, and couldn't shut his big fatuous mouth on the subject. Oops. A few weeks later, the father went into his library to look up father in the Oxford English Dictionary, to feast his eyes on the praise of fatherhood through the centuries, but he couldn't find volume F to G, and then he discovered the 3 others were missing too, A to B, L to M, and V to Z. He began a probe of his household and soon learned what had become of the 4 missing volumes. A man came to the door this morning, said his little daughter, and he didn't know how to get from here to Torrington or from Torrington to Winstead. And he was a nice man, much nicer than Robert. So I gave him 4 of your books. After all, there are 13 volumes in the Oxford English Dictionary, and that leaves you 9. Moral. This truth has been known from here to Menander. What sauce for the goslings? Not sauce for the gander. I can do a couple more short poems if you're up for them, or I can stop. It's your guys' time. I love this. So anything you wish. Okay. Well, did I read this one? Okay. But I can't do that. And we'll do the second verse. Let's go past the ones here. This one is weird, and I'm wondering why I chose it. It's got a funny accent that I don't think I can do justice to it. For Prendre Congé. And I don't think I can do that. Fairly sad tale. I think that I shall never know why I am thus and I am so. Around me other girls inspire. In men the rush and roar of fire. The sweet transparency of glass. The tenderness of April grass. The durability of granite. But me, I don't know how to plan it. The lads I've met in Cupid's deadlock, or shall we say, born out of wedlock? They broke my heart, they stilled my song, they said they had to run along, explaining so to sop my tears. First came their parents or careers, but ever does experience deny me wisdom, common sense? Though she's a fool who seeks to capture the 21st fine, careless rapture, I must go on till ends my rope, who from my birth was cursed with hope. Heart is half, and half is chaste, archaic, but mine resembles a mosaic. The things become ridiculous. Why am I so? Why am I thus? I think she really had a keen sense of herself. It was another one. I'm sorry, all these purple things look the same now, and I've had them completely. Oh, this one's a good one. The false friends. They laid their hands upon my head, they stroked my cheek and brow. A time could heal a hurt, they said. A time could dim a vow. And they were pitiful and mild who whispered to me then, the heart that breaks in April, child, will mend in May again. Oh, many a mended heart they knew, so old they were and wise, and little did they have to do that come to me with lies. Who flings me silly talk of May shall meet a bitter soul. 'Twas June for June was nearly spent away before my heart was whole. Thus, it never took her very long to get over a failed relationship and into a new one. This one I'm specifically looking for, and I'm not finding it, and I apologize. I thought I had. There was one about her abortion, and I can't find it now. Let me see if it just happens to be here. Here, this is what it is. This is on Thurber. There was a time where he stayed up all night, tossing and spelling, and spent. This is about Thurber, but it's done in quotes, so it's something he said or wrote that Lillian Ross, who was one of the people at the round table, very famous writer in her own way, and devoted friend to both Dorothy Parker and James Thurber. They were trying to point out how incredibly bright he was. Thurber did go to not only high school, but Ohio State University. He was a scholar, came out near the top of his class, but he couldn't be given his graduate degree because in those days you were required to take ROTC in order to get your degree. And he couldn't take RSTC because he was blind in one eye. So they posthumously, many years later, gave him his degree from Ohio State. But he ran the Lantern and the newsletter he just was incredibly prolific, incredibly bright. Also was a writer, a news reporter in Paris post pre-World War II, post World War One, and obviously fluent in French. But he talks about who else could stay up all night tossing and spelling and spend 2 hours hunting for another word besides flocks, which has an HLO in it. He reported that he found 7: matchlock, decathlon, pentathlon, hydrochloric, chlorine, chloroform, and month-long. Then he reported that more than a dozen others beginning with PHLO, but I had to look them up in the dictionary the next morning, so that doesn't count. The other words were the ones he could lay there in bed and pull up in his head. Fascinating. I am going to stop because I think I'm too disorganized to find the other poem I wanted to read to you. It was very sad and touching because it was about her suicide. And thank you.